Well, we are just excited that you're with us at the Ransom Church. Welcome. Before we jump in, I want to talk about Easter a little bit. This week, as Steph mentioned, this is Palm Sunday. This begins Holy Week. And how holy this week will be for you is kind of up to you, you know. We have an opportunity to celebrate the greatest news this planet has ever seen, the greatest truth this world has ever known, that Jesus is alive. That's what this week is about. And so we want to invite you to celebrate with us. So we have Good Friday services at 5:30 and 6:30 p.m. at both campuses. No tickets are needed for those. Just join us. Remember what Christ did. We do have children's ministry for age 0 to 3 on those nights, and so you can come, but participate in as a family, and maybe mark your calendar. That's the way you could begin to really celebrate Holy Week. And then Easter services. We have 9:30 a.m., 11 a.m., 4:30 p.m., and 6 p.m. at both our campuses. And if you haven't gotten tickets yet, we do tickets for this event to try to control, so we make sure that we have seats for everybody at every service. And so they don't cost anything; they're free. If you haven't signed up for them yet, you can stop by the table in the lobby and let them know how many tickets you need for what night, how many you need for those you want to invite, what your need is for children's ministry. There will be children's ministry 0 to 5th grade. We'd love to have you participate, but you need to stop at the table. If you already signed up and you're like, I haven't got my tickets yet, the tickets are in the mail. We promise. They're coming. But if you haven't done that yet, you need to stop by that table and let us know what your ticket need is so we can help you out there. That would be amazing. I really highly encourage you, if you could, check out the morning services. As you can imagine, 9:30 is the most full right now, then 11, then 4:30, then 6 in that order. And so the later you can go in the day, the more it helps us out, the more seats we could have for people who will visit on Easter and check us out. And we want to make sure that we can just accommodate everybody and make sure everybody hears the truth that God is love. And so please make your Easter plans and be thinking about that today, and it would really, really help us out, okay? So we are in the final week of a series we've been going through entitled Called Out. We've been talking about our mission for the future, and we've been wrestling with God's desire for us as a church to choose calling over comfort and to follow his call for our lives, even when it isn't the easiest thing to do. And we've done all of this, as if you've been here, you know this, as launching part of our Called Out Generosity Initiative to support what that video just talked about, to support our vision of campus expansion, of reducing hunger in our community, of creating global impact through our partnership with Poetis. And so we've done all those things. You know, we talk about being the body of Christ. We talked about being called out of selfishness, called out of complacency, and called in the world, to be in the world but not of it. Today, as we wrap this thing up, as we land, we're going to talk about what it means to be called into sacrifice. Okay, today is Commitment Sunday. At the end of this service, we're going to challenge everyone here to fill out a pledge card for the next 2 years. Everyone here, we believe, has a number, and every number will be a sacrifice. Now, I understand. Some of you today, you came in, you know your number. Either you already filled out your pledge card, or you came prepared. You've been praying about it for 5 weeks. You know. Others of you, you're like, I'm not so sure. And then there's some of you who are like, what's going on right now? I'm here for the first time. I have no idea what's happening. That's okay. And if you're here for the first time, you're a guest, this doesn't apply to you unless God just incredibly challenges you and stirs your heart. And then we would just challenge you, be obedient. But for those of you who you call Ransom home, you've been coming, you know where we're going, let me give you a tool today. If you're one of the ones you just haven't landed yet, let me give you a tool today for determining what your pledge might be. We want you to give us your 2 cents worth. Okay? We want you to give us your 2 cents worth. Anybody ever heard that saying? There are a lot of sayings out there that all are, some sort of good advice, but they sound weird when you first hear them, if you don't know what they're talking about. Like, a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush. You heard that? Or a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. Yeah, you've heard that one. The journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. For me, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with a motorcycle, but, whatever. Or how about this one? A rolling stone gathers no moss, Well, there's all kinds of weird phrases like that. Did you know that today's phrase actually has scriptural basis originally? Now, the phrase, that's just my 2 cents worth, actually was first used in the 1920s to illustrate a common practice of, giving someone unsolicited advice. The point is, you're giving them something that has value, but it lacks value in their eyes, okay? But the etymology, the original earliest reference to that comes from a story from Mark chapter 12. So turn with me to Mark chapter 12, if you will. If you're using one of our Bibles, we'll be on page 608. If you're visiting with us today or you just don't have a Bible, you could raise your hand. The ushers will come around and bring you a Bible and you can follow along. If you don't own a Bible, please raise your hand and we'll bring you a Bible and you can keep it. It's our gift to you. We want to make sure you have God's Word. But Mark 12, page 608, we're going to read a story known as the story of the widow's mite, and not might as in strength, M-I-T-E, mite, as in a unit of money. Now, before we dive in, I need to set the scene. The story takes place at the temple in Jerusalem, and Jesus arrives in Jerusalem, and it's about a week before the crucifixion takes place, and he goes directly to the temple because the temple was the center of society and life, and it was a place where they described it as a place where heaven and earth intersected. Okay, and the temple was actually a form of concentric rectangles, as you can see from this image here. The closer you got to the center, the holier the ground was considered. The closer you were to the presence of God, and the fewer people were allowed there. And I'll just give you an example. The furthest out court was known as the court of the Gentiles. That's where anybody who was non-Jew, that's the closest you could get. If you were not Jewish, that was the closest you could come. The next ring in was known as the court of the women. That's where our story takes place. And in the court of the women, this is where ritually clean Jewish women could go. Okay? And then the next ring in was for the men. And the reason they did that was this was a very patriarchal society. So you had the court of the women, and then the men could go in the next court. And then on the inside was the temple itself, where only the priests could go. And inside the temple, you had the holy place, but you also had the Holy of Holies, where only the high priest could go, only one time a year. It's where the Ark of the Covenant sat, right? All of these things were happening. And you can see, just as you're closer to the center, the more holy it got. Well, our story takes place back out in the court of the women. And around the edge of the court of the women, were these, basically they were offering buckets shaped like trumpets. And they were mounted all around the outside, and people could come and they could drop in their offerings, okay? This sets the stage for our story today. Now, before we jump in, let me pause. Who are our role models? In our culture, when you look at any culture, you can tell a lot about a culture by who they choose as their role models. Our role models demonstrate what we value, the characteristics and the virtues that we deem important. So who are some of those role models in 2017? I just picked a couple. LeBron, right? King James. Not the one that, the Bible's named after, but Steph Curry, You get in the music world, Adele is like huge right now. And then when you just talk about being famous just because you're rich, Kim Kardashian, right? I don't even know what else she's done. I don't know who she is except she's rich, okay? But all of these point to one thing in our culture. These are role models we tend to be drawn to right now because they display success, fame, beauty, but more importantly than any of them, wealth. For our society, can we just agree money has become our new temple? It's the center of what we chase after, and so it's no wonder then that we idolize who we do. Well, why do I share that? The religious leaders that we're talking about in this story, they were LeBron James, okay? The temple was the center of culture, the center of life, and these religious leaders, these scribes and Pharisees, they were at the center of that system. They were educated, they were literate, they were wealthy, they were the authorities on Hebrew Scripture, which was at the center of everything, and that knowledge gave them power, and so they were admired by everyone. So it would have been completely shocking to everyone when Jesus actually condemns them. So let's jump in, Mark 12, verse 38 to 40. Jesus also taught, "Beware of the teachers of religious law, for they like to parade around in flowing robes and receive respectful greetings as they walk in the marketplaces, and how they love the seats of honor in the synagogues at the head of tables at banquets. Yet they shamelessly cheat widows out of their property and then pretend to be pious by making long prayers in public. Because of this, they will be more severely punished." So Jesus condemns these leaders, these religious leaders, for overlooking the widow, for cheating the widow. Literally, it's translated for devouring widows' houses, okay, which was a shorthand way of saying they made themselves rich while overlooking those who had need around them. And it's on that foundation that we come to our story and what it means to give your 2 cents worth. So let's jump in verse 41. Jesus sat down near the collection box in the temple and watched as the crowds dropped in their money. Many rich people put in large amounts. So I want you to understand what's happening here. Jesus sat down next to the offering bucket. No pressure, right? This is, the feeling that when you're driving and you're obeying all traffic laws and a cop pulls up next to you and you get that feeling like you're not doing anything wrong, but you feel super nervous. You're like, I hope he doesn't pull me over for driving with my hands at 10 and 2 and no distraction. But you're like, you have this panic. This has to be like that, except way worse. Jesus is sitting by the offering plate, okay? And so people come in and they're giving their gift, and there's these 13 trumpet-shaped receptacles all around the courtyard that the worshipers are using. And Jesus has what we just read, he just gets after the scribes and the Pharisees for strutting around, acting self-righteous, overlooking poor widows, and then drawing attention to themselves as they give. And as Jesus is sitting there watching the offering plate, these same guys walk in, and they strut around, and they make a large gift in a very public way. See, many times the religious leaders would make a show. They'd bring big bags of coins, and they make their offering dumping the coins into the trumpet. You can just clink, 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 It's a lot like this guy who paid a fine in pennies. Watch this.
This guy is pushing a wheelbarrow full of pennies into the Department of Motor Vehicles to pay a bill.
He broke into his piggy bank.
Nick Stafford took revenge on his local DMV by paying auto sales tax with 5 wheelbarrows of pennies.
How much was the total tax bill?
$2987.45.
$2,987.45.
That's correct.
The staff at the DMV office in Lebanon, Virginia had to count each penny by hand, and there were 298,745 of them. Where do you even get all those pennies?
Got the pennies from the bank. They came rolled in the paper rolls. So instead of just taking the pennies and rolls to the DMV, I paid 11 people to come in with hammers and break up the penny rolls.
Then there was the price of the wheelbarrows he needed to carry 1,600 pounds of pennies. Total cost, $2,000. This ended up costing you quite a bit of money. Was it all really worth it?
Absolutely, worth every penny of it. I did spend a lot to get the pennies down there, but I think I proved my point, and that in and of itself is priceless.
All right, how many think that guy's crazy? How many think that guy's a hero? Yeah, I knew there were some of you, right? Okay, public show, public display. I'm trying to make a point. That's what these religious leaders were doing. They would come in and dump it in, right? Now watch what happens next, verse 42. Then a poor widow came in and dropped in 2 small coins. You cannot miss the comparison happening here. The wealthy come in, they give a big offering. Then this widow comes in, one of the overlooked of society, and she approaches the offering receptacle, and she drops in 2 coins that were literally worth less than 1 penny. They were 1/128th of a day's wage. They were the smallest coins in circulation at the time. I'm going to say nobody noticed her. I'm going to say when they added the offering up that day, nobody noticed it. So what's so interesting is that Jesus notices. Look at verse 43. Jesus called his disciples to him and he said, I tell you the truth, this poor widow has given more than all the others who are making contributions. For they gave a tiny part of their surplus, but she, poor as she is, has given everything she had to live on. Guys, this is the turning point of the whole story, okay? The reason I chose to speak on this today is because far too often when it comes to money, when it comes to things like this, there's a lack of understanding about how generosity works, what true sacrifice looks like, what it's all about. All these wealthy leaders show up, they give lots of money. They gave a lot, they did, but they weren't generous. Then this widow shows up, gives almost nothing except it represented everything that she had. You have to understand, there was nothing at home, okay? It wasn't everything she had on her. It was everything she had. Please hear me. There's a difference between giving and sacrifice. Those who dropped in larger amounts gave out of their excess. They gave out of their surplus. They won't really miss it. It took zero faith on their part. She gave out of her very essence. And it was an incredible step in God's provision. Now, it shouldn't have been that way. You understand? The people who gave the big amount were the ones in charge of taking care of her so she wouldn't be poor. She wouldn't be in that situation if it weren't for them, and yet in front of them, she drops in all she has. Now listen, I'm not saying you have to give everything. I'm not even saying you have to give anything. For people who are having a heart attack right now, I'm not saying faithfulness requires give all you have. God's not necessarily calling us to live hand to mouth. What he is calling us is to remain fully surrendered. Can we agree on that? To be fully surrendered to his will. Jesus did not deny these guys gave these large gifts. He merely said she gave more. Theirs was a contribution. Hers was a sacrifice. Let me illustrate it this way. Recently, I was sent a sermon where a pastor illustrated this point perfectly. Imagine this circle is everything you've been entrusted with. It's everything God has given you. It's all the provision, all the blessing, all the resources that he's given you in your life. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. My circle's not that big, right? So I'm going to draw a smaller circle over here, okay? Now, let's say the size of this circle represents all that God has given you, all that you have. Technically speaking, which circle is bigger? Not a trick question. That one, okay? Which is better? From a human perspective, this one is also better. Why? Because bigger is better. That is not God's perspective. God does not measure the size of our circle. God measures the size of the sacrifice that our circle represents. It's irrelevant to God the size of your circle, the size of the circle of the people around you. What he's asking is, how much are you willing to surrender? They gave a lot that was a little. She gave all she had. And there is a difference between giving and sacrifice. Listen, God doesn't care about the circle next to you. He cares about your circle. It's never the amount of giving that matters. It's never the amount of the size of gift that matters. It's the amount of the size of the gift to you. It's not about giving. It's about sacrifice. It's about obedience, not to anything that we say, but to what God calls you to do. These ask completely different questions. Giving looks at the whole circle and says, how much of it should I give? Sacrifice looks at the whole circle and says, God, what would you have me keep? God, it's all yours. You just tell me what to keep and I'll give the rest. God, I just want to be obedient. And the question we're left with is, what is your 2 cents worth? For the widow, her 2 cents represented everything she had. And that's what God is after, not equal giving, but equal sacrifice. He's not asking you to give what anybody around you gives. He's asking, will you make your gift a sacrifice to you? Now, there are lessons I think that we can learn from this widow and her 2 cents worth. The first lesson I think we can learn is that generosity must be God-focused. It has to be about listening to the voice of God. That's the only reason that you would ever do something like this. The only good reason. When it comes to a generosity initiative like this, the number one question people ask me is, what should I give? And my number one answer to them is, how should I know? Sacrifice isn't defined by my opinion. It's not defined by how much the next person gives. When we fill out pledge cards at the end, I recommend you don't cheat off your neighbor. It's not about what they're doing. Sacrifice is determined by one thing alone. What is God asking me to do? And that's true in every area of life, whether it's giving our time in service. Oh, they give more time than me. Who cares? What time did God ask you to give? Whether it's pouring our lives to our neighbors and friends, meeting the physical needs of our community, whether it's giving towards a generosity initiative, the only question that ever matters in any of those is, God, what are you asking me to do? What would you have me do, God? I can't tell you what God is asking you. I can tell you whatever he asks you will stretch you, whatever that is. Which leads to the next lesson. Generosity is more about attitude than amount. Donald Whitney wrote a book called Spiritual Disciplines for the Christian Life, and he talks about 3 kinds of attitudes that we can have in our giving. The first is what he refers to as grudge giving. Grudge giving. This is a type of giving that says, I have to. I don't want to, but I have to. This is the giving we do to the IRS, right? It's the giving when when you get a traffic ticket, I have to pay that. You're grumbling the whole time, but you have to pay it. The second is what I call obligated giving. It's when you feel duty bound to give in this way. This is the type of giving that says, I ought to. This is the type of attitude that we pay our bills with, right? This is the type of attitude, if we're being honest, that sometimes at Christmas when we walk out and we hear dingy, 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 dingy. Anybody given to the Salvation Army out of obligation? Yeah, I ought to. I mean, sometimes I do it out of thankfulness, and other times I'm like, dude's looking at me, ringing the bell, like, I ought to, you know. And then there's a third type of giving, thanksgiving. This is the type of giving that says, I want to. This is the type of giving that leads a young man to save 3 months of income to buy an engagement ring for the woman he loves. Here's a question. What attitude do you carry into generosity? Do you approach generosity like it's the IRS? God's come to collect. Or like it's the cable bill? Or do you approach generosity like you're giving to the object of your love and desire? Giving out of thanks shapes and molds us, and it brings us to a greater level of trust in God. When this widow dropped in her 2 coins, she did it with a level of God-honoring trust that is mind-blowing. Okay? She would be aware of Psalm 68, where it says God promises to be a father to the fatherless and a supporter of widows. And so she gave out of that supreme faith in him. He's going to take care of me. And that caused Jesus to sit up and take notice. Her gift was greater because her trust was greater. Why would we think God would expect any less of us? Giving to the Lord is not to be done out of obligation or duty because you have to. It is meant to be an act of dependence and surrender. God, you tell me what to give, whatever it is, I'll do it out of thankfulness for all you've done for me. The third thing we can learn is that everyone has the capacity for generosity. If generosity is about a big circle, everyone does not have the capacity. If generosity is about my circle, no matter the size, everyone has a capacity. And this is the lesson I want you to not miss. This is the greatest lesson we can learn from the widow. Everyone's got the capacity for generosity. I know there are people sitting in the room right now, and you're like, I love this place. I would love to help, but I feel like I have nothing to offer. What I could put in there is not good enough. Pastor Phil, I would love to give, I have nothing. And we view stewardship like a mirage on the highway. You ever see, you're driving on a hot day and you see and it looks wet, like way out, and ripply, but you never ever get there. That's how a lot of people view stewardship and generosity. And we say to ourselves, I can't, I'm too financially strapped right now. Once I get into a new season, and by the way, we do this not just with generosity, we do it in every area of our lives. We say, once I finish college, once I start my career, once I get married, once I get that raise, once the car is paid off, once the school loans are gone, once the kids are out of the house, once I retire, then I'll get in a life group. Then I'll start serving. Then I'll start being crazy generous. Then I'll trust God with my resources. Then I'll have the faith of the widow. And like the mirage on the road, it just keeps moving. Because have you not found there's always a demand on your time and money? Until you make a conscious effort to put God first, it will never happen. Everything else in life will push him out of the picture. Here's the deal. Everyone has a number. And in just a few minutes, we're going to make pledges. And I know there are people in this room right now, and you're going, I want it, but my pledge, there's no way my pledge could matter. Who think you have nothing to offer, think again. Even if it feels little to you, here's the cool part. Everyone can experience the blessing and reward of God that comes with just laying yourself before God and saying, God, I trust you. I trust you. God wants to do a work in every one of us by removing the stranglehold that money can have on our lives. And just speaking into our spirits. And here's what I'm most excited about as your pastor. Because you got to know, as your pastor, as your church staff, we hate this stuff. Nobody wants to talk about this. But what I'm excited about is to watch everyone in our church go before God in prayer and say, God, what are you speaking to me? Have everyone in a moment pause and listen to God and say, God, what do you want me to do? And then obey what he says. That's why we can say that the money part is secondary. We just want to see everybody listen to God and obey. And he takes care of the rest. And I'm so excited to watch every soul in here be transformed through this simple exercise in surrender. God, show me what you would have me do. Listen, God doesn't need your money. He just wants your heart. He just wants your heart. He wants, well, the reason he asks us to do this, what he wants in all of this is he just wants you. He wants your life, your heart, your mind, your soul. He wants everyone who's part of the Ransom Church to say, I'm part of something bigger than myself. I'm part of a kingdom movement. I don't know if you realize that. You're part of an amazing kingdom movement. Over the last 8 years, what God has done, this church is 8 years old. What God has done in 8 years is miraculous. None of us did this. You didn't do it. I didn't do it. God did it. But it's also just the beginning. God is getting ready to unleash some things through the Ransom Church that will stretch our imagination and that will blow our minds. Yeah, we're planning on launching West Campus in the next couple of years as funds allow, but we're doing that as part of a continuation of our multi-site strategy. And if we hit our goal of 1.9 million, we can do that. But not only can we do that, we can feed so many people. We will be able to provide 100, if we reach our goal, we'll be able to provide 175,000 meals through Kids Against Hunger. We'll be able to provide 7,700 meals in our own community through our school system, through Feeding South Dakota's backpack program. We'll be able to launch an international mission center in Zambia that's going to minister to the widow and the orphan and the vulnerable. We'll be part of all of that. So for whatever part you're about to play, thank you. You're a part of making that happen. That's why we're calling people to this. To me, this is an incredibly high and holy moment where we have a choice of what we're going to do. We can, like the Pharisees, make this all about us. Or we can be like the widow. And we can humbly come before God and say, God, what would you ask of me? What would you have me do? And then hold nothing back. Perhaps you walked in with a number in your mind. Maybe you already filled out a pledge card, and God is nudging you. You're dreaming too small. Why don't you add 10%, 20%? Why don't you add a 0? I don't know what God's telling you. Perhaps you came into this place and you're like, I ain't giving to that. I'm not doing it. And God is just stirring in your soul. Don't listen to us. Listen to the Lord. So what I want to do is I want you to take a moment to just wrestle with God and just say, God, show me what to do. And while you do that, watch this story from Brian and Kelly.
We've been going to the Ransom Church for 4 years. We started coming to the downtown campus. We were one of the first couples to go to Harrisburg campus when we started that, and then made our move to South Campus.
We were of the Catholic faith all of our lives, and we just felt like there was something missing in our church life, in our faith, and I just started kind of church shopping. And I had heard a few good things about Ransom, and I came down here. The first couple of times that I was here, I would just leave in tears. I really wasn't sure what was going on, but I just knew that whatever it was feeling right in my heart. And of course, it's the Holy Spirit that has finally moved into me, and I only got that when I came here. So for me, it's just been completely defining of how we're going to go on living our lives.
I find myself, and I think Kelly too, where we dive into the Word, daily, and we do devotions every day, and just seeing God move in ways like that is, it's awesome. Finding the Ransom was probably the moment. Like I said, it's changed our lives, and it's definitely a blessing, and it's also strengthened our marriage and basically our relationships, just meeting all kinds of new people and inviting them to the Ransom, and seeing some of our friends come to the Ransom it just brings us a lot of joy and happiness, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.
I feel like we've always been pretty generous. We've been very blessed that we've always been successful and had well-paying jobs and made good incomes. We've always been generous with our money, but now even more so with making it a priority. The top places that our income goes is tithing immediately, investing, and then to two causes that are very near and dear to us. Our time, I think, is where we really struggled with being generous. We love our free time. We love spending time together. We love traveling. So we were always very stingy about giving our time. And now with the Ransom, it's something that we just do because we want to. We want to give Ransom our time. We want to give the nursery our time and tech our time. And we want to be involved in life groups and give that time of our Sunday afternoons, which before would have never happened. He'd be down watching football and I'd be upstairs doing whatever. We would never give that time. But now it's something that we actually want to do. We want to be generous with our time for God. We have no problem inviting all of our friends to the Ransom. We've actually gotten a few of them to come and check us out. Several of them have actually joined the Ransom. We just feel like it's something that we have to share with everyone because it's amazing what the Ransom is doing to people's lives, for people's lives.
I know for a fact that there's going to be bigger and better things to come yet, so looking forward to it.
So let's go back to where we started today, okay? We want you to give us your 2 cents worth. And I don't know what that is. But on your chair when you came in, there was a pledge card, and they're going to put it up on the screen. And it just says, by faith, I commit to give a total of, and there's a blank there. To the called out campaign, above and beyond my regular giving over the next 2 years. And this is where you get to fill in the blank. Between you and God, you have to determine what is my 2 cents worth. What is as a family, our 2 cents worth? What portion of my circle does this gift represent? It doesn't have to be the whole thing, doesn't have to be, it doesn't matter, but what is God telling you to do? What's the pledge that you have to make that God is saying, this is what I want you to do? It will require a level of trust in you that will be, in essence, your widow's mite. And just like the temple court that day, there are receptacles all around this room, and in a moment, the band is going to lead us into songs, and during that time, we're going to dismiss you by rows, and everybody's going to have a chance to go and drop your card in. And today is a defining moment for our church. It could be a defining moment for you. Think about generosity as like a stairs or a ladder, okay? We're not asking you to climb the whole thing at once. We're just asking you, what would be your next step? Someone here, you've never given anything ever, and that's where you're at, and that's fine. And maybe what God's going to ask you to do is, for the very first time, take a step of financial faith and give something. Maybe you've given sporadically or periodically, and God's saying, I want you to use this to create the habit of regular giving. Maybe for you give but not your 10% tithe, and God's going to use this to get you up to the 10% tithe. Or maybe you tithe and God is challenging you to take the next step in generosity. I don't know where you're at. I'm simply saying, will you listen to God? Again, don't listen to me. Listen to God. Take whatever step He's telling you to make. Now, the reality is there are 4 types of people in this room today, and I don't want to ignore the elephant in the room. So I want to speak to each group. Group number 1, you know exactly what you're giving. You prayed about it. You talked about it as a family. You have your number. Either you filled out your card or whatever. You're unified. You have a sense of confidence. That's what God is asking you to do. Today, write that number and celebrate. And if you've already filled out a card, you can write already pledged, and celebrate. I'm so excited what God is doing through us, and you'll drop that card in. Group number 2, you have an idea what your number is, but you're still grappling with the amount. Maybe you had a number in your head, and then you heard the message, and now God's stretching you a little bit. Maybe you already made a pledge, and then you heard the message, and God's stretching you a little bit. And so today, maybe what you're going to write in that box is at least this. And you say, well, I don't know, I'm wrestling, but we know the minimum number is going to be this. We're praying for more. We're wanting to trust God for more, but we're just going to write down at least this, and that will be your commitment. And you'll drop it in. Group number 3, you're pumped out of your mind about this. You're all about it. You're excited. You're all about the church. You can't wait to make a commitment. You wish you had a number. You've got no clue. Like you're not even close to a number. And you had every intention of giving, but this snuck up on you 5 weeks, and you thought, I'll know by then, and you just don't know yet. Today, we don't want you to write down anything you're not ready for. You're just going to write praying. I'm praying about it. And drop your card in the box, and we'll continue to walk with you as you wrestle with that. And then there's group number 4. Group number 4 is not planning on giving at all. And there's a lot of reasons for this. Maybe you already pledged. That's cool. You can write pledged or leave your card blank. Maybe you're a guest and you're like, I don't even know you people. Totally cool. Just leave it blank. You could write your name and write guest, and that would be great. Maybe for you, you just don't know how you feel. Maybe you love the Ransom, but you're like, I don't know how I feel about this whole called out thing at all. You can write 0. Here's the most important 0 that we'll receive. Maybe you're sitting in here and you've been wrestling with this and you don't have peace. If the number God tells you to write is 0, that's your number. We're okay with that. And if you want to change it later, we're okay with that. If you're not ready to give, leave your card blank or write a 0 or do whatever, write already pledged or I'm a guest or whatever you need to do. The only reason we're having everybody do this is so as an act of solidarity, nobody's left out, and together we get to participate in owning what we're doing. And so this is just going to be a high and holy moment for us. And we're going to mark that high and holy moment with communion. We are going to celebrate his sacrifice while at the same time making one of our own. Now, are we implying that filling out a pledge card is a sacred act? No, it is not. It's not even a contractual act. It's a faith step. Now, communion is sacred. It's a sacrament of the church. It should not be taken lightly. It should not be taken flippantly. But the pledges that we will make together, they are simply a small reflection of the spirit of sacrifice, a small symbol of what we're surrendering as he surrendered for us. And so what we wanted to do is give you an opportunity before you make your pledge to consecrate your heart through communion. If you're here and you're not a believer, you shouldn't take communion. You should come up, drop in your blank card, and just go through, and nobody's going to think anything. You should not take communion because that's something that's sacred for believers. But we do practice something called open communion, which means if you're a believer, even if you're not a member of this church, if you're a believer, participate in communion with us. So let me consecrate this time with prayer. Let's pray.